Unit 2, Developmental Psychology. Presentation 3, Types of Attachment and the Strange Situation.
The idea of secure and insecure attachment is fundamental to Bowlby's theory of attachment. Bowlby proposed that secure attachment leads to healthy social and emotional development, whereas insecure attachment is more likely to lead to less desirable outcomes, such as having difficulty making friends or becoming depressed and withdrawn. In this presentation, we're going to look at these two types of attachment. However, before that, we're going to explain the research technique used to identify an infant's attachment type, a technique known as the strange situation.
Introducing the strange situation.
The American psychologist Mary Ainsworth was particularly interested in individual differences in attachment, the different kinds of attachment that infants formed with their mothers. So she set out to design a method that could be used to measure this. She called it the strange situation. She used this term because she planned to test infants in a new environment, one where they would be feeling slightly anxious. It was not a strange environment as such, just strange to them. So what was involved?
An infant and his or her mother sat in a research room that was about 3 metres by 3 metres and was marked out in 16 squares, so the observers could record where the infant was at any time.
3 people were involved as participants: the infant's mother, and a stranger. Over the course of each study, one infant was observed in 8 different episodes. The first of these involved the infant plus mother. Then the stranger entered and talked to the mother. This was followed by various episodes where the mother left the infant on their own with the stranger, or the infant was totally alone, and finally the mother returned.
A group of observers made a note of what the infant was doing every 15 seconds. In particular, the observers noted whether the infant was trying to make, resist, or avoid contact with the mother or stranger.
There were 4 key behaviours of interest. First was willingness to explore. In other words, how much the infant would wander away from its mother when playing. Second was separation anxiety. This is the distress shown by an infant when separated from its mother. Third was stranger anxiety. This is the distress shown by an infant when approached by an unfamiliar person. And finally was greeting behaviour, which refers to the way an infant greets its mother when she returns.
In total, they observed the behaviour of 106 middle-class American infants.
What they found, first and foremost, is that there were recognisable patterns in the infant's behaviour. For example, 66% of the infants displayed a particular pattern of behaviour across the 4 key behaviours. Let's look at them.
First, they were keen to explore the room when on their own with their mothers. Second, they showed low separation anxiety and were easy to comfort when their mother left the room. Third, they displayed high stranger anxiety when left on their own with the stranger. And finally, they enthusiastically greeted their mother's return. These infants were described as securely attached.
The remaining 34% of the infants were described as insecurely attached, and this group was further separated into 2 subgroups called insecure avoidant and insecure resistant.
The insecure avoidant group were characterised as being willing to explore, indifferent to their mother's departure, showing low levels of stranger anxiety, and avoiding contact with the mother on reunion. They generally avoided social interaction and intimacy with others, hence the description of being insecure avoidant.
In total, 22% of the infants tested were classed as insecure avoidant. The third group of infants were labelled insecure resistant, 12% of the total. These were infants who were less interested in exploring, showed distress on their mother's departure, displayed high levels of stranger anxiety, and both sought and rejected their mother's contact on her return. In general, their behaviour was either rejecting or being resistant to intimacy and social interaction, hence the label insecure resistant.
Subsequent research has shown that there are 2 key behaviours associated with these different attachment types.
First, Infants who were classified as securely attached had mothers who responded sensitively to their needs, whereas the opposite was true of insecurely attached infants.
This concept of sensitive responsiveness refers to a mother's willingness to respond readily when her baby cries or smiles by picking the baby up or interacting in some way.
It's worth noting that infants who were insecure resistant had mothers who, in addition to lacking sensitivity towards their infants' needs, also tended to vary between sometimes ignoring their infants and at other times being over-interested in them. Second, a link has been found between early attachment type and later healthy social and emotional development. For example, securely attached infants tend to go on to be more popular in school and form more lasting relationships in adulthood.
So, these are two very important behaviours linked to secure and insecure attachment. The mother's behaviour as the source of the infant's attachment type and the future consequences for each attachment type.
We now turn to a consideration of criticisms of the strange situation and of the classification of attachment types. The first point to make is that the classification of 3 attachment types has been criticised because it overlooks the fact that some children don't really belong to any of these categories. In the 1980s, Main and Solomon analysed videotapes of children in the strange situation and identified a 4th attachment type. They found that some infants would show very strong attachment behaviour one minute, followed by avoidance or looking fearful towards their mother the next minute. They called this disorganised attachment.
Another important attachment type has been identified more recently, which is called disinhibited attachment. The word disinhibited means lack of restraint. The label is used because it seems that children who form no attachments early in life are later indiscriminate in their affections, trying to form relationships with anyone they meet. However, such relationships tend to be superficial and don't lead to lasting attachments.
The second point of criticism concerns the validity of the strange situation technique. It is only measuring one relationship, that between the infant and mother figure. However, an infant's attachment type might not be created solely by this one relationship. The child's attachment type could be the outcome of many different attachment relationships. For example, if we measured the same child with its mother and its father and a grandparent, each time we might end up with a different classification. Which of these is the child's real attachment type?
This leads to the conclusion that we are just measuring the child's relationship with the adult in the strange situation, rather than the child's attachment type. Attachment type might be a kind of sum of all attachment experiences.
One of the key claims of Ainsworth's idea of attachment types is that maternal sensitivity is fundamentally important in determining whether an infant becomes securely or insecurely attached. However, more recent research by Slade and colleagues found that maternal reflexive functioning was more important.
This refers to being able to understand what someone else is thinking.
So a mother who is sensitive to what her baby might be thinking and feeling is likely to be able to provide sensitive responsiveness. This means that it is the so-called reflexive functioning that is of key importance.
A second key claim about attachment type is that it is linked to later healthy or unhealthy outcomes in terms of emotional and social development. This is called predictive validity, and there is research support for this. For example, Hazan and Shaver conducted a newspaper survey where people were asked to recall events in their early lives and also describe their current romantic attitudes and experiences. Hazan and Shaver found that respondents who they categorised as having been securely attached as infants were, as adults, classified as more trusting and more likely to form lasting relationships. This supports the idea of a link between infant and adult relationships.
What can we conclude? The strange situation has provided a useful tool for conducting research into attachment, and despite some problems remains widely used in developmental research. It has been adapted for use with older children and adults. The concepts of secure and insecure attachment have led to useful insights into infant and adult behaviour and provide an understanding of how parenting practices can be improved.